All right, everyone. Once again, welcome to our educational series, What You Need to Know About Homeowners Associations in Belize. This is an important topic, especially for those of you who are looking within a development or a community, a planned community, because HOA fees and rules will most likely apply to what it is you are deciding to own. And I know for a lot of people, it is a new territory, right? Chartering a new territory as you're coming into Belize and learning all about this. So during this educational series, it's going to be fairly quick. I'd say about 10-15 minutes. Feel free to ask your questions at the end, but we will have this up on YouTube afterwards as well. So my name is Rachel Jensen. I'm the owner of Luna Realty Belize here on Ambergris Key. I also sit on the board for the Belize National Association of Real Estate, and Belize has been my home over the last 10 years. Over the past decade, I have bought a handful of real estate here in the country, some land, some condos, just a variety of different types of properties. And so have gone through this process before of reading all the documents, making sure I understand what it is that I'm purchasing. And my goal with this session here is to make sure that you just become a little bit more acquainted with what that HOA process looks like. So we're going to go through HOA facts, so things that you need to know about homeowners associations here in Belize. We're going to go through the top 5 questions asked that I would recommend you ask as you are looking at real estate with an HOA. And then we'll have an open forum for any Q&A should you have any. Otherwise, if you're listening to this afterwards, feel free to type it into the chat or the comment section or the email address there at the bottom as well, info@lunarealtybelize.com, info@lunarealtybelize.com. That comes to me, and I'm always happy to get those questions answered for you. So let's just jump right into the HOA facts here. So properties that are strata titled, and I'm going to take a step back there. There are 2 ways to title property here in Belize. One is freehold, which is when you own the land and then the structure on top of the land. And the second is strata. And strata is when you essentially own the space within the 4 walls of the property, right? So think about condos, for example. This is a very common way to hold title for condos, or if there's multiple homes or properties on one single land, one lot that's titled in that one name. So there are a variety of ways for titles to be distributed, but strata is certainly the most common that you're going to be finding when it comes to those condos and whatnot. Now, in order for there to be an HOA, you do need to have the strata already sorted, right? So sometimes people buy large chunks of land, and then from there they may subdivide into smaller parcels, or they'll use that large chunk of land to build, let's say, 100 condos on it. And so as you're going through the process, once those are complete, then you do end up getting the strata for it. So there is something called the Belize Strata Act. If anyone is curious as to what that actual process looks like in strata, doing the strata-ing, making that into a verb there. But that does need to be done and complete prior to an HOA being established. Now, sometimes you are finding pre-construction properties or developments that are building one building at a time. And so what they can do when that one building is done is get that registered under the Belize Strata Act. And then from there, the HOA bylaws can be established. I'm actually going to jump down to number 3 over here, and then we'll go back up, because I think that these 2 hang together well, is that when the strata is eventually completed, the bylaws do need to be registered with the Lands Registry Department for them to be legal, for them to have teeth. And you'll see over here on the right-hand side, that's the stamp that they'll put on the document when it is approved. And so when you are deciding to own a property within a strata community, within one that has an HOA, I would certainly make sure that there is that stamp on that HOA document, on the bylaws, to ensure that they have been registered. And that's really the only way that this document has teeth in the legal system here in the country. Going to jump back up to number 2 now. Understand that monthly fees will vary by development. So, and I'm actually going to even jump down here to number 6. Sometimes cheaper isn't always better. Sometimes HOA fees may be a little bit more than you anticipate. But if this is your first time owning real estate, I'm going to talk about being on the coast here or being on the Keys. If this is your first time owning property within close proximity of the water of the Caribbean Sea, please understand that your HOA fees may be a little bit higher than you're anticipating, because the salty air here does a lot of damage, especially to steel and whatnot. There's a lot of rust. There's a lot of corrosion, or a lot of corrosion that happens. And so you really want to make sure that everything's being maintained. And then with the salty air, things do need to be painted more regularly than they would if you're not by the salty air. So sometimes you just have to go into it with that understanding, and know that things may just cost a little bit more than you have your mindset on, but understanding what that breakdown looks like, of course, is important. All right, also going to go to number 4 there. Know that there is what we call a general sales tax, GST. It's 12.5%. that is payable on HOA. So how Belize views HOA is that it's a service, right? The Homeowners Association is a service to accomplishing XYZ. And here in Belize, there's a 12.5% service charge on anything that's considered a service, or GST tax on anything that's considered a service. So please note that. I would highly recommend that you ask the HOA manager or the property manager if that GST is included in the HOA numbers that you're presented. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not, but that 12.5% can get a little expensive if you don't have it already included. And then we're going to say last but not least there, number 5, since we covered number 4 already. Number 5 is that an HOA does have a lot of benefits. Now I have people reach out to me and say, I want a property with no HOA, but I want water, I want electricity, I want paved roads there, I want this whole laundry list. I want to make sure it's safe and there's a security, and certainly you can find lovely single family home properties that you can find all of that in, but it is a little bit more challenging. And so an HOA, I think, has a ton of benefit. Personally, I don't mind paying HOA fees as long, of course, it's being handled properly. But HOA for me ensures that my property is being taken care of. Now, if you're somebody who's not planning to live here in the country, having an HOA is probably one of the best things for you, because you know your property is going to be looked after. Most likely there'll be security there. And you just have that peace of mind of knowing that everything is running and operating okay. Now, the other piece of that is that there's just a lot of property upkeep that happens in an HOA, right? So jumping ahead of myself there. So you have great curb appeal, ideally, and then you have that increased or maintained resale value. Now, I have seen properties here where there haven't been any HOA, or the HOA was just so incredibly low that I don't even know what they were trying to cover, but it wasn't even getting close to that. And so what happened is there ended up being these really funny looking buildings, because the buildings, maybe there were 6, 10, 12 owners in the building, and they weren't paying into anything. And the building just started to be, chip away, because that's what happens with the paint. And so the building needed to be repainted, but nobody really wanted to contribute. I think like half the owners wanted to contribute to the building, the others didn't, right? Because maybe they weren't coming down regularly, it wasn't an investment for them, or they just simply didn't care. And so this just created this friction between the owners who wanted to do it and the owners who didn't want to do it. Because think about it, if you're trying to sell your property down the line and your building, it looks like it's abandoned because it hasn't been painted in 10 years, that's probably not going to do, you're not going to do well from that sale there. And so there is that opportunity for increase, or at least maintaining that resale value down the line. In addition to that, ideally, when it's working properly, it's an organized operating system, right? So you have people who are on the ground who are taking care of things, so you can be hands off. And I know a lot of times we are coming and going, right? And I have a condo down south that I do rent out, but I can tell you, whenever there's a problem, they can just work with the HOA, or they can work with the property manager that's to make sure things are getting taken care of. I know that the building is being maintained. I know the landscaping is looking good, so that my renter is also happy. Very, very important. And I mentioned this before when we were jumping around a little bit, but cheaper isn't always better. Like I mentioned, I've seen some HOAs that were either non-existent or just really minimal, and you ask for a breakdown and it just really doesn't include anything that would be necessary in order to keep the building up. So those were just some quick facts for you. We're going to jump into the top 5 things for you to ask when you are looking at properties that have an HOA. Well, first and foremost is there an HOA, right? And this can be coined as community maintenance fee or condo owners association, a lot of different names for a homeowners association. But essentially, it's when they ask you for money on a monthly basis or quarterly basis in order to accomplish upkeep of the area, general maintenance, amenity maintenance and usage. And so understanding if there is that number. Now, some don't have an HOA set up already, and that's okay, right? That maybe they don't have that critical mass yet, or maybe they haven't gotten that strata plan yet. And so they're just still trying to figure it out and make sure that everything's good. And for some people, that's fine. You'll go into an investment or own a property and you'll work with the other owners to get it figured out, or you'll work with the developer to get it figured out. For some of us who maybe like a little bit more detail, like exactly knowing what we're getting, this is probably something that you want to avoid. You may want to wait until later down the line, till they have that strata established, or until they have those bylaws for you to understand if this is a property that works for you or not, right? Some bylaws are a little bit more restricted than others. And so you do want to read those prior to deciding to purchase. In addition to that, understanding what's included. And I've represented a handful of different properties here, sold a handful of different properties, and can tell you that the bylaws are always completely different. And sometimes it includes cable, sometimes it includes the reverse osmosis system, sometimes you have to pay for your water, sometimes it's included. Here's just a quick list of of things that I have found to be included or not included when I was reading through bylaws. And so for you, this is good to know too. And I'm going to just run through them quickly because it's important for you to jot that down. And when you're going through your HOA, is seeing how comprehensive that HOA is. And sometimes they'll keep HOA fees lower and then have more expenses for you as the owner. Sometimes they'll have them higher and make it easier for you as an owner. I've seen bylaws that include the cable and internet, right? And some folks like that, they don't need to deal with the setup. Others don't like it because maybe they want a much higher speed than you have in the condo or the home. I mentioned to you water. So in Belize here, there's public water. And if you're connected to public water, chances are that it will not be included in the HOA. Everybody has their own meter. You're paying for your usage. In other cases, water is being collected there on the property. Water catchment systems are very popular here. Wells are very popular, especially for areas that aren't connected up to the public water. And in some cases, that is included in the HOA. Other times you're paying per gallon. So understanding that. Waste, where is your garbage going? Is that part of the HOA, or do you have to collect your bag every day and find somewhere to throw it out? Guess that goes with garbage disposal. Actually, that was garbage disposal. Waste is from the other waste that we're talking about is how is that handled as well. That goes along the lines of the water and sewage. In addition to that, security. Some places have security for 24 hours. Others have it for the night. Some don't have it at all. So, what provides the most peace of mind to you there? In addition, upkeep of the exterior and common areas. This is important, again, for maintaining the curb appeal that we mentioned before. Also salary for maintenance workers or the HOA workers, insurance on the building and common areas. In a lot of cases, insurance is handled by the Homeowners Association, right? Meaning that they'll get the quote and then from there, homeowners pay it. Sometimes it's included in that HOA fee. Other times it's a separate line item. Reserve funds, you want to make sure that there's enough there in reserve. Amenity upkeep, of course, we talked about that a little bit before, making sure the pool is looking good. You don't want it to be green. You want it to be skimmed regularly. Landscaping and all these, I'm guessing are pretty standard that you would be expecting, but is landscaping including? And then what about the roof? Some places include the roofs in HOA and maintaining it and redoing them, others don't. So these are just a handful of items. There's of course a ton more that you could be looking at, but it is again important for you to see that breakdown and understand what's exactly included in your HOA so that you don't have any surprise bills down the line. Number 3, who's in charge of the HOA? So in a lot of cases where properties are still developing, the developer is still involved, the developer will really have control of the HOA, make large decisions. And typically there is some sort of voting system so that the current owners have a say or can contribute. But at what point does that developer turn it over to the homeowners entirely? Some cases it's when the structures or the development is 100% complete. Sometimes it's when it's 75% complete. Sometimes it's when it's 50% complete. So it really just depends there. Most developers, I would say, are not handing over the HOA until it's 100% complete. So that's why we always recommend that you get to know who the developer is. And of course, read those bylaws, right? The bylaws were likely assembled by the developer. So understanding their mindset is pretty important too. Number 4 here, this is a good question to ask, is seeing if rentals are permitted by your homeowners association. And not necessarily saying that your homeowners association will be the one managing that, but they, in the bylaws, they can determine whether or not you can have long-term rentals and nightly rentals there in your place. And a lot of times they will permit it, right? But there are some stipulations for it. So understanding too who handles those nightly rentals. And I'm going to jump for a minute here because number 2 is really quite important, is when it comes to nightly rentals. So vacation rentals, the property that's under the one strata plan all needs to be managed by the same management company. So this is not new. It's actually been around for a while, but the BTB, the Belize Tourism Board, just put out a notice reminding people about it. So if you and I own a condo in the same development, you and I have to have the same nightly property manager, right? And most likely that property manager is already going to be determined by the HOA. So the HOA says this is the property management company that we're using and the rental management company that we're using, and you have to work with them for the nightly. Now for long-term, there's a lot more flexibility. If you're renting your condo out for 6 months out of the year, you can use your friend Bob Smith down the road to be that property manager for you. Of course, he needs to be legally able to do that, but understand that that has a little bit more flexibility. But it is important for you to know that, because that last question there is, do the owners have a say, is really important. Are the owners able to give their opinions and look back after a year and say that we want a new property manager, or is that solely determined by whoever is running the HOA? So understanding that part, I have had some clients who wanted to do nightly rentals in their condos that they were looking at, and knowing that up front is great, because then we won't even look at properties that do not permit nightly rentals there on site. So know that, but that same site, they have tons of long-term rentals. But again, knowing that and knowing what your ultimate goal is really important as you're exploring your opportunities. And then last option, or last question that I'm going to recommend that you do ask as you're further exploring is, are there any clauses about HOA increase limits? A lot of the ones I've seen, typically it's about 5 to 10% percent per year that they're able to increase it on. Anything beyond that, you'll need to get votes by the board or by the majority. And, of course, there could be special assessments that does need to be voted on by the homeowners most of the times. And then also, when was the last time there was an increase? Because they could have had the same HOA fee for 10 years, but then the year that you come in, maybe they decide that they need to increase it 10% or whatever that maximum limit is. Or maybe they're voting that they need to increase it more because they haven't been increasing it. So understanding that, and really at the end of the day, the Homeowners Association funds belong to the homeowners. It's not a piggy bank for the developer or whoever is managing it. It is really the homeowners' funds that are put within a fund and managed to make sure the property is being well taken care of. I always recommend, when you're buying property, or when you're part of a condo development or strata development, ask to see the minutes from the previous year so you can see what they've been talking about. Ask about those price increases that I mentioned, because that's just going to be really good for you to know over the years. So those were the top 5 questions. I'll just recap them for you quickly. Is there a homeowners association? That's always a good one to start with. What's included? What's not included? Who is in charge of the HOA? Are rentals permitted in your HOA? And are there any clauses about HOA increase limits? And when was the last time there was an increase? So those would be the top 5 questions that I would recommend you ask, and things that you look for as you are reviewing the HOA documents. Now, at this point here, we've covered a lot of information already. Of course, there's always a lot more to be discussed, but I'm happy to have those conversations with you. Maybe you have a condo that you're looking at and you want to know what the HOA looks like. You can certainly request those bylaws. Most of the time, you have to sign an NDA, but prior to owning, you certainly need to be reviewing those HOA bylaws. And sometimes there's the covenants and was it codes and restrictions, something along those lines. The CCNR, where you can where it determines what you're allowed to build in on your property, or how you have to build depending on guidelines, architectural guidelines and whatnot. So you just got to really be prepared. And that's really where I'm going with this, is making sure that you're educated as you're coming into this new market and exploring. So with that being said, if anyone has any questions, feel free to type those there into the chat box or the Q&A box. Otherwise, if you are listening to this on YouTube, feel free to add any questions there too, or comments to the comment section, and we can certainly get those answered and acknowledged for you. All right, everybody. Well, have a fantastic evening or afternoon or morning, depending on what time you're listening to this. And I look forward to seeing you here in Belize. Bye, everyone.